Thank you all for joining. I do want to make this a very interactive discussion, so at any point throughout the dialogue, if you have questions, just raise your hand or ask. I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. The way you pronounce that very odd name up there is I'm Xochitl Monteon. I've been in the IT information industry for about 23 years now. It wasn't a chosen career journey. I actually began in environmental engineering. I was going to go save the world, work in semiconductor fabs and save owls, water, air, you name it. That quickly led into managing semiconductor chemicals and processes, so hazmat, haz waste, which led to emergency response management, which led to risk management, which led to physical security, as well as business continuity, disaster recovery, and very quickly evolved into IT and information security in about the course of a year. So in about a year out of college, I found myself in a completely different career track, which was great because I think it was a great foundation of getting a comprehensive view of different types of threats. I would say I spent about 3 to 4 years within the semiconductor industry, moved on into focusing strictly on business continuity and disaster recovery for Sun Microsystems. Did that globally for about 3 years. Moved on from that into consulting for another 7 years. And during that time period, I worked for probably over 20 different companies in Silicon Valley, developing information security, emergency response. Should we close the door? Yeah. So emergency response, business continuity, and information and security for quite a few different industries. In that journey, I really had the opportunity to learn from some amazing leaders, either as customers or as a direct employee of them. One of the clients that I had at the time was eBay. I actually joined eBay full-time and spent about 5 years working for eBay Inc. In quite a few different facets. I worked for eBay Inc.'s global IT organization for some time. I also worked in the PayPal data warehouse and analytics for some time. And then the most stressful, I would say, out of my entire career was making sure that PayPal.com stayed up without any downtime. So 9 months of my experience there was building a redundant data center that had to go live during peak period without any sort of service interruption. So I think I aged a decade in 9 months during that period. And then I, shortly after my career at eBay, I joined McAfee. My first day walking onto the site, there was a big tent outside that said, "Welcome to Intel." So I was on the overall journey. It was an interesting decision. I wanted to move to a smaller company because eBay had grown so much. And I thought McAfee is going to be perfect, so I rapidly went from a 40,000 person company, which was eBay, to a 100,000 person company, which was Intel. Over the course of, I would say since April, we completed the integration, the McAfee integration, which is now called Intel Security. And I am now part of the Intel organization responsible for managing information security, so internally within Intel as part of IT reporting into our CISO. So that's a little bit about me. What I want to share with you today is really what I've learned in the course of those last 23 years. Because whether you are, so one of the things that I've come to realize is I'm a salesperson. Because I'm selling something people don't necessarily want to buy. And I remember my first year when I was managing environmental safety and regulatory compliance, I was passionate about it. The regulation says you have to do A, B, and C. No one else really seemed to be as passionate as I was about it. So I learned a way to really communicate with various stakeholders to be able to present a value proposition on how to ensure that you're able to recruit ambassadors within your corresponding programs, because none of us scale. So I want to share a bit of that information. Before I go into those, and I'll cover 3 specific points of how I've built the various programs at, whether it's been a company that I worked for directly or developed a plan for a client. Does this work? Yes. So, and I know you probably have been bombarded with a lot of the stats, but I just want to cover a few which I believe are really critical. As we look at the evolving landscape, and this is just the last 5 years, the number of users, we have an additional 1 billion users over the last 5 years. more attacks, and you can see the increase from 9.4 to 42.8, a tremendous amount of increase in data, bigger networks, more complex networks, and more connected devices. And as we're looking also at connected devices, we're also looking at really new targets. And we've seen that with mobile. We've seen that with cloud. And then we're beginning to see that, I think, quite a bit more with Internet of Things as we look at a more connected world. Along with that, we also have really smart hackers, right? So as we're looking at the type of malware, the sophistication, the complexity that we've seen year over year, really our approach and how we scale within our organizations needs to change. And what that means is we need to start speaking a very different language. We need to stop being less geek-like and turn information security language into a conversation that really our partners can understand. I never have the same conversation with the same department. I will always do a little bit of research, and a lot of this I think goes back to my consulting days in sales. Who's my audience? Who are my stakeholders? What drives them? If they're someone in sales, if they're in marketing, if they're finance, legal, it really depends on the type of discussion that you're having with those various stakeholders. So as we're looking at ourselves as leaders, it's really ensuring that we're able to articulate the value of security in a way that they can really, that really resonates. So I'm going to cover three key things. The first one being information security governance and how to leverage that to drive partnership and understanding. I'm really going to drill in on communications because I think it's really key and it's something that we don't focus on enough. Really, what's in it for them? That's something that I always get. Why? Why? Right? Because the policy says so, because that standard says so, because the regulation says such and such. I've had discussions with business units where it's as simple as, I'll assume the risk, I don't want to do it. So you really need to position the security value proposition in a way where it makes sense for them and it adds value to their organization. And the other component is delivering on the fundamentals. We can't lose sight of all these distractions with new devices. We still need to continue to focus on basic security hygiene. All right, so, and I know as we're looking at different frameworks, there's quite a few that can be used. I know within the public sector, NIST is used. Within the private sector, just depending upon the industry, we use quite a few. We use ISO 27001. We overlay it with NIST because we also work with the government. We have PCI. We also have CFATs because we're manufacturing. So we have this pretty massive pivot table of every single regulation we need to comply with, but really, if we look at ISO, that covers about 80%, and then you have some specific ones based upon industries and different segments within the organization. But fundamentally, if we look at this boils down to people, process, technology, right? As we look at the various components, we have a management component, we have our operational components, and then of course you have technology. But I think the key point is really security is very comprehensive. You can think of it as a team sport. It's not just IT's job. Everyone within the organization has a role to play, but it's up to us as leaders to be able to articulate what the role is in a very tactical manner so they can digest it. I want to hone in on people because I think that's really key. It's probably something that as technologists we really don't focus in on enough. I had an employee a few companies ago that I worked with, extremely bright, master's degree in computer science, every single certification you could think of, CISSP, CISA, what else does she have, CBCP, and I forget the 2 or 3 others. Really sharp. Struggled a tremendous amount within the organization because for her it was very black and white. The policy says, thou shalt do this, you're not doing it, and there was no compromise, which meant either they were secure or they were insecure. So it was a very negative sort of relation, and no one really wanted to have a conversation as related to compliance from information security. So we looked at her overall skill sets and focused in on really the softer side, which is really building business acumen. Did she understand her customers? Did she understand the mission and vision for that particular department that she had to support? Did she understand the drivers? I had her attend all of the monthly meetings that department had so she could really get an appreciation for what they were focused on. I had her take communication courses on conflict management and negotiation. And through a course of really understanding what the value was for her business partners, we came up with a plan for really how to weave in security controls into everything they did. And I know there was a presentation early how to design security in. It's a heck of a lot easier to do it at the concept state, whether it's a process redesign, whether it's a technology, than it is to try to get it once it's gone live. So having that conversation early on, getting them to embed security just the way they would a marketing or sales campaign for the go live of some initiative or a training component, build in security components into them and really improve the overall value proposition of what it is they're delivering. They'll do security and you begin to embed it in the culture of the organization, and it's just the way they operate. It doesn't become this other check that comes in once a year as part of some sort of audit or review. The other piece too, and I'll go back to another customer that I worked with, was to really, they had, the framework was in place, they had the policies, they had a training program, but they were still having quite a bit of issues. So I said, okay, show me your policies. So I said, they're right there, they're on this website, everyone has access to them. Awesome, so I printed them out. Again, not environmental anymore, so I printed them out. And I literally I weighed this thing, 18 pounds worth of policy. A grocery bag that I carried around as I was reading through them to try to figure out what are we communicating and who was it written for. Worst thing you could ever do is have an engineer write policy. And that's who wrote every single policy, was the security engineer or the security architect. And you could not understand what we were asking our end users to do. It was the combination of a policy statement. There were phrases like should, could, might, maybe. There were links to SharePoint presentations, to ISACA documents, to NIST it was just such a mess. And their response when an employee called and asked for guidance was read section 20.5-3. That was the response from information security. Go figure it out. So our goal, our CISO said, get this done in 3 months. We said, yeah, it's not going to happen. We were able to get it done in 9 months. And we rewrote every single policy, including change control and ensuring that we were still in compliance with ISO. And our target was get it down to 10 pages or less. Any of the technical components need to be a standard because your audience are your app developers, your SAs, your DBAs, or architects. The end users don't need to understand any of that. They just need very simple. And then we pulled in a user acceptance team. Our, I would say, highest maintenance group of people. Any guess who those might be? Our exec admins. So we recruited about a dozen exec admins, and we said, we need you to read this. Can you understand what it means? So they were kind of our final group to review them. If they could understand them and had no issues with them because their attention span was pretty short, they provided us feedback. They said, well, okay, so you have 10 pages or less. Great, it's still too much. So they said, what about Cliff Notes? Can you do Cliff Notes? And we said, okay, well, we could probably do a version of that. So we did video Cliff Notes. For every single policy, we created a 2 to 3 minute engaging video, cartoonish, that hit all the highlights of that specific policy. So when we rolled out the new policy set, it was new policies, everything had a learning aid, which was a short little video. And I'll touch on my other point, which is training, which is you need to change it up to your audience. We also pulled in our millennials, and we said, what do you think of the video? They said, it's too long. Okay, so what would work best for you? Well, do you have blogs or can we use Twitter? Great idea. So we started, Twitter campaigns for some of that information and just, pointed to a 30-second video or some small campaign for them. And then we created a contest. We use Drive internally at this particular company, and we created a security awareness campaign. Whoever saw the most videos, created unique videos on YouTube, or was able to post them on our SharePoint site. Over a course of a month, we tracked points. And they can make a recommendation on a policy, on a video, on something they saw. Whoever had the most chatter through social media won a prize. And I think we auctioned off a few iPads as a prize. But it really engaged the various generations that we had within that company And it helped meet the need of that company, that particular organization. Every organization is different. It will vary company by company in terms of the culture and acceptance, but you need to be open to really making those adjustments. The other component too, as we saw the change in landscape, is you need to reassess your technology. So monitoring. When's the last time you checked alert settings on them, right? Is it picking up the right data? Are you reassessing it? Are you tuning your monitoring to be able to capture the data that you need? And are you looking holistically at what has potentially been missed? So an example might be you may have a very high-risk type of malware, but you may only have one instance of it in your environment. Granted, it may be a remote access Trojan that comes in and is exfiltrating data, but because it's one, you didn't catch it. So again, ensuring that you have the appropriate monitoring within your tool sets is also something that you need to consider. And then finally, as we're looking at incident response and incident management, it's also ensuring that your triggers are still appropriate, and then you have appropriate escalations. So those are all things that I think you can do specifically as you begin to extend and engage broader audiences. What I'll give you an overview here is really what's worked in terms of governance. So it's easy to say, hey, governance is great. Well, what would it look like? I've used this at a few companies. It's similar to what we're using now at broader Intel. But it's really building upon quite a few different sets, and you leverage governance really to get consensus, to align up priorities, to ensure that you have resources and funding, and you have a multi-year plan that people are on board and will execute to. So in this particular model, we have the control owners in the middle, and really the control owners are your SMEs. So this could be the individual that is responsible for SOX. We also have internal audit as one of our key individuals. And the reason we have internal audit is they also have a very focused agenda on things that they want to audit for the course of the year. We align on what is being audited, what's specific to information security, and how can we partner with you? Because what we don't want is we don't want to get into whack-a-mole. We don't want to get into, hey, I found privileged access issues on this system. Hey, I did another audit and I found privileged access issues on this system. I found one here, here, here. So at the end of the year, you have 15 audit findings around the same thing, and you may have spun up 15 different efforts for people to aggressively go address them, but you didn't address an enterprise issue. So as we're partnering with really internal audit, is how do we look at things holistically, and how do we ensure that you're asking the right questions? So if you see an indicator of a root cause, we address root cause, and we mitigate it once and for all. We're not spending a ton of money on point solutions. So that's actually been a really great relationship as we've continued to build that out. Legal's another key partner, and then we also partner with different parts of information, of IT operations, our enterprise applications, architecture, again, and we didn't focus on every single control, we focused on our highest risk ones that we really wanted to move the needle on. The top one is really different management tiers. This goes all the way up to the board of directors, so we have the board of directors update that this eventually trickles up into from a dashboard perspective, and below that we have all of the IT VPs, and then all the corresponding business VPs and decision makers. And then below what I would call all our worker bees, which are the operational review committee, that's primarily IT focused. They're responsible for owning the risk, and be very clear, they own it. They're accountable for it. They're measured against it for IT. And same thing on the Enterprise Security Alliance. I thought that was a cool name. They get t-shirts, so they're excited about it. But really, these are your champions and your ambassadors within the organization. This is how you scale. You can't be everywhere, so you need to train them to go ask the appropriate questions. They own the dashboard. They own the metrics. They own the risk. They report out to their leadership for decision making. So if there is a focus in a specific area that needs attention, that needs money, that needs prioritization, we prioritize it, we agree on the metrics in the dashboard, and their business unit funds it. So again, it's a comprehensive view where IT doesn't have to pay for everything and IT doesn't own everything. You are really subject matter experts providing support to be able to get them to improve the overall enterprise security posture. Any questions? All right, no one's running out for lunch, so I'll take that as a good sign. So in that, I did mention one thing, the risk component. Because they're partnering with you to identify the risk, they own it, and they've either accepted a risk or they've come up with a model for how to arrive at some type of risk mitigation effort with an agreed upon timeline. It might be that they have risk for 6 months, for a year, but there's a roadmap for them to get to an improved security posture, and that may involve changing out technologies, updating hardware, changing their processes. So it could be a significant change, but that's where InfoSec really needs to partner on those timelines to get to an improved posture and what sort of mitigating controls can be in place in the interim in terms of checking. As we look at the getting it just right, it's almost like the story of the three little bears, right? So it's a balancing act of how do you ensure that you're kept legal, you have appropriate availability and protection, and at the same time, it's cost effective, right? Because that's the one thing that everybody, what's the ROI? It's really difficult. I just had this argument with finance yesterday. It's really difficult for me to give you an ROI on risk, right? I can't predict what would have happened without it. So let's look and focus on risk avoidance. And then let's figure out a way for me to improve productivity and performance. And I'll show you a cool way to do that that's worked for me in the past. But as we look at these things, again, it's keeping it simple. It's ensuring that you can communicate to different audiences and get away from secret decoder rings. I've run into many companies, which I find kind of funny, where I will get a security architecture diagram with an attachment called decoder ring. What is this? And it's going through explaining what everything does, what all the acronyms are, what the intention is. So we need to get away from speaking security. We're going to lose people. So we need to figure out how to simplify it. So I spoke on a few of these things already. I want to focus on the cost savings because that's key, and that's a question that will come up with anything you want to deploy. How is this making it better? How are you improving my efficiency? Show me the ROI for this investment. So way back when, my first company, when I told you I wanted to go, save the environment, save owls, I was frustrated for the first year. No one really cared except me. But the one thing that company was absolutely passionate about was quality management. They were manufacturing. They were TQM 9000 certified. They went to picnics, they got awards, they got prizes, they got stock, and they all had these little badges with their quality statements. I said, wow, how do I get my stuff into that, right? So I read up on ISO. I spoke with the director for the ISO program, and found it's pretty simple because really, as you're looking at quality, you define what it is to your company. Then an auditor comes in and checks, are you doing what you said you're going to do? Like, well, safety should be in there. Environmental compliance should be in there. Business continuity should be in there. I mean, it's all goodness for our suppliers. So he said, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Let's put them in. That's simple. So we embedded. Now, the trade-off was I had to be a trainer for a year. And I said, okay, that's fine. So I did that for about a year and became an ISO trainer. But one of the key things that I learned in that first, in being able to integrate it was, one, I was speaking their language. As soon as it became part of their ISO standard, they were all coming to me, what do I do? How do I meet this? Can we get an award? And we went from no one being interested to everyone being extremely engaged because it was something that they cared about. It was something that the company was very passionate about and part of their culture. Lean Six Sigma, I've used it ever since. So the last 22 years, I've been embedding Lean Six Sigma into everything. Because what that allows you to do is it allows you to optimize end-to-end workflows, and you deploy a security program, and you can show an ROI. So password resets is perfect. It's a perfect example. So why does everybody use password 1234, right? So if you go through the 5 whys. Well, because I get locked out of my computer and it's difficult for me to remember. Well, why is that? Well, because, and then you could go through the 5 whys. And root causes, well, heck, if I had some sort of automated way to just reset the password, that's one. Reduces tickets, reduces end user frustration, reduces productivity. You can quantify that. What's the cycle time you've just reduced? Or the other thing is, let's set up a piece of technology to manage passwords. The ROI is so simple on that because you can go through how horrendous the experience is today, the frustration, and believe me, there are more than enough people to come to that meeting to express how frustrated they are at the existing workflow, and you can show very rapid ROI for something that might be $50,000, and you get your ROI within the same year. So wherever possible when you're deploying a process change, like the policy one was perfect. Everyone hated the policies. It was easy for me to go in and say, they hate the policy, they don't understand them. I need $150,000 to get a consultant in, to update it for 9 months, update a website, create some very inexpensive videos. Can I have it? There you go. But you have the data of how horrible the experience is today to how much better it will be, and you can quantify it. And what I did include, for those of you that aren't familiar with Lean Six Sigma, I have some links in the back for some value stream mappings and just real basic fundamental fishbones and 5Y type of diagrams. But it's a great technique to use to, again, sell your security agenda. Again, for BCP, business continuity disaster recovery, it actually works very well if you're trying to pick up what I would say a less expensive solution. If you get into the bigger enterprise solutions, those tend to be at about $1 million. Those are pretty expensive. There are some lower end solutions or modules that can also be leveraged that you can probably pick up for about 50 to 60K. But those are other things in terms of standardization, alignment, and comprehensive integration between your crisis management plans, business continuity plans, disaster recovery plans, and incident management plans for security. Very rudimentary SQL database systems that really give you a view by location, by department, so you can gather that information very quickly. So again, other ways to be able to make a use case for new technologies or solutions. And then finally, don't lose sight of the fundamentals. Verizon is here. They're going to be giving a presentation at 2. For those of you that have not read the Verizon 2015 Data Breach Investigation Report, you should go. And I have no connection with Verizon, but I use the report a lot. And it's extremely insightful, very useful. And I know Intel Security does contribute to some of the data within that report, but it is just such an amazing report to give you historical data. And if you're looking at statistics that you're trying to leverage in terms of the changing landscape, because there's so many companies that input into that report, it's really valuable data. And I have one of their stats in here, which I found really interesting. If we look at basic security hygiene, 99.9% of exploited vulnerabilities were compromised more than a year after the CVE was published. That's just basics, right? That's ensuring that we're patching. So we still aren't getting it right. We're not getting the fundamentals right. The other piece that's in there, which, and I'll hit on awareness and training, because that's something I think is very impactful. 23% of recipients now open phishing emails. 90% of all incidents are due to people, either becoming infected, making a mistake, doing bad things. But 90%, that's a pretty significant number for us to go be able to make a dent in, right? So how do we do that? And a lot of it is just doing the fundamentals. So, and I don't remember if it was in this report or in another report. I believe it's at the end of the Verizon report. Their top quick wins. Any guesses? Number 1, or any of the 5? No takers? Okay, all right. So number 1, patching web services. Number 1. Number 2, user lockout after multiple failed attempts. You think, oh God, this is common sense, right? Number 3, mail attachment filtering. Number 4, restrictability to download software. And number 5, AV. Things we're just not doing. So again, we get so distracted with breaches and IoT and cloud, and we're lacking on the fundamentals. So as you focus on your programs, ensure that we don't lose sight of that we still continue to focus, go back to the top 20 controls. Go back to the basics. ensure that we're getting the basics right. Now, I understand it could be overwhelming to go through and do a risk assessment across the enterprise, but if you've already done what you should be doing, right, which is your data classification, you understand where your high-value assets are, they're tied to tiers, they're tied to availability, your 20 controls, if we look at just that, a subset of what really matters within your organization, check how you're doing within that space. You know, if you can't address everything, focus on those high-value assets and begin to make some inroads within that overall space. And last but not least, user education and awareness. You can put different lipstick on a pig every 3 years and put a new color and throw it out there again, and it will feel new. But you need to change it up. You need to address your incoming populations, contests, quizzes, videos, blogs, training events. It just needs to be hammered so much to individuals so they can, you know, it begins to resonate. They begin to understand what it is you're communicating, and you need various flavors. You can't have the same conversation with the same person. You need to know your audience. You need to market your value proposition for those various audiences. And if you have an opportunity to target into an area of risk or a specific segment of your organization that's having challenges, ensure that you make those adjustments before you present that material. You know who you're presenting to, what they're passionate about, what piques their interest, and position that collateral in that manner. And that is all I had, I believe. Yes. Oh, one other thing. So I included several resources. I'm a huge fan of the documentation and structures that the country of Australia has, so I included a link on here. They have some amazing resources. So this is mitigation strategies, and that's the URL to the Australian government. I also have a link to the McAfee quarterly threats report, so again, you can access those. I have a link to the latest one that was just published. And then I gave you guys a few links for crash courses on Lean Six Sigma. Again, it's a great way to show ROI. If you're stuck and you can't get something funded, you'll find a pain point there in a security control. You should be able to figure out a way to make it a business case for funding by showing optimization and workflows. And that's it. Any questions? You're just so odd. All right, well, I will be here for questions. I understand lunch is right outside the door or somewhere, so let me know if you do have questions. Thank you.